Welcome, 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 and two more welcomes. Welcome and welcome. Coming to you live from a downtown theater in Fresno, California. It is our privilege to continue part of our series where we talk to professors, writers, reporters, thinkers, anybody on the left, anybody on the right. As long as they have complete thoughts, we want to provide their opinion about political polarization in America, its solutions, or what it is, and provide it to you unedited and unaltered so that you can do this thing that was popular back when I was in high school called Thinking for Yourself. Maybe it'll come back, maybe it won't. With us today, it's our privilege to have, I'm going to try this, Belinha?
No, Belinha.
Belinha, let me try that. Abreu?
Close. Abreu.
Belinha
gay.
Abreu,
Yeah.
professor. She's a global media literacy educator and author. She's also worked at the International Media Literacy Research Symposium and the IC4ML. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second here. Okay. She's also the National Media Literacy Research Award recipient. She's also the founder of the International Media Literacy Research Symposium, IMLRS, and the president of the International Council for Media Literacy, IC4ML. She's a global media literacy educator. She served as an international expert to the Forum on Media and Information Literacy for UNESCO's Communications and Information section. Very prestigious. Her research includes media and information literacy education, education technology, global perspectives, critical thinking, privacy, and big data, young adults, and teacher training. She's the president of the International Council for Media Literacy and the founder of the International Media Research Symposium. She's the recipient of the 2021 National Association for Media Literacy Education's Media Literacy Research Award. Her work has been featured in Knowledge Quest, Cable in the Classroom, Civic Media Project, and other publications. She's also author of Media Literacy for Justice, Lessons for a Changing World, Teaching Media Literacy, Mobile Learning Through Digital Media Literacy, and co-author of the International Handbook of Media Literacy, as well as other books. Covered that. Some of these are repeats, sorry. International, she's formerly, all right, here we go. She served as the president of the International Council for Media Literacy, formerly known as the National Telemedia Council, national nonprofit organization that has been promoting a media-wise, literate global society since 1953. IC4ML also produces the Journal of Media Literacy, for which Dr. Abreu is a member of the editorial board and has been a guest editor on several occasions. The doctor also promotes a BA in communication with a concentration in television production and public relations, and MLS in library science and instructional technology, a PhD in curriculum and instruction with a focus on media literacy from the University of Connecticut. Her work has been featured in, we already got to that. Okay, I think we've covered a lot of it. This is the International Council for Media Literacy, bringing academia to action, and a little bit about media literacy. But before we get into that, let's check in first and see, Professor, how did we do? Do we need to get anything wrong?
No.
How probably did I mispronounce your name? And I apologize.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm at Sacred Heart University working there as a professor, but I also am a practitioner. So I work in schools. I feel like I wear multiple hats. So this is perfectly fine.
Okay. And that's how you can find out more. She's the founder of International Media Literacy Research Symposium. There it is. And also the president of the International Council for Media Literacy. And on the bottom, she's the National Media Literacy Research Award recipient. So that's how you can find out more from the professor. Professor, I have so I looked at all your websites, all your links. Before I explain it, what is media literacy and why is it important? And before you answer, if you could talk to me both as an academic and as an American with two working eyeballs, and if you could pretend that I've been in a cave for 5 to 7 years, why is media literacy important now? Why should we care at all? Is it an important topic? Is there big problems it deals with? What's going on?
All right, so let's go backwards.
Okay.
We should care. 100% we should care.
Okay.
But I think the misnomer is that it's only been around probably the last 8 years, when in fact it's been around since the 50s. And the problem is that we've sort of had a shift in the way in which we think about media literacy. So in its definition, it's the ability to access, evaluate, analyze, and depending on which definition you use, whether it's the Center for Media Literacy or if it's other organizations, there is the producer piece, the act piece, the advocate piece. Everybody has a different version of basically saying, who are you in action in this role? So I think, what it comes down to is that media literacy took shape in 2016 in the public view because of the polarization, because of the fact that we were disconnected from each other. Certainly, the language started to shift so that people began to distrust media, even though I think there was distrust for quite a long time, but it really took a prominent role after 2016. And therefore, we started to hear language like fake news, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, you name it. And so that really shifted the way in which people started to think about, oh, we might need media literacy now because we are in a place where we need people to think about information. So for me, I think it's been something that we've always needed to have. It didn't originate in 2016. It's been going on since the beginning of media, newspapers. If we go back historically through Thomas Jefferson's time, all the way from the time we had radio and regular television and film, you name it, all of that has been true to understanding how media has captivated us and changed us in many ways. And I think that's always been the heart of media literacy, is the understanding piece, the ability to process information. But it's sort of been highlighted more so since social media has taken its strands and certainly propelled us into different directions. But then more than that, because of the fact that we do have this polarization, as you mentioned, in this country and around the world. It's not just here.
Right. Right. I was watching something on Brexit, and
Yeah.
yeah, they went through similar levels of polarization based around the similar motivation
Sure.
we did. Just took a different course. What is it? Media literacy has been around since the 1950s. Now it's new life has been blown into it since the 2016s. Is it a good thing that people are more concerned about media literacy, or is it a bad thing because now the situation is so bad? I mean, why did we not pay attention in the 1950s, 60s, 70s? Was it just we bought into this narrative that everything's fine and the government tells us all the truth? Was there
No.
no what? Why didn't we take? I mean, why did we not take this seriously before? And suddenly now in 2016, I mean, like you said, there was fake news before. The media didn't always tell the truth. There were problems before, yet it didn't seem to grab the public imagination.
Well, I think community was different then. When you look at what communities are like today, they're in some cases disenfranchised, they're disconnected. There's a definite separateness that has gone into our world, despite being the most connected time in our lives. We are the most separated, individualized, lonely. I mean, if we pull in all the mental health things that have come up in the last several years, we really actually kind of see that. But I think the other part is that, we lived in a time where we had three stations, the community aspect, the newspaper, the local newspaper, all of that was sort of building blocks to all the things that were happening.
Mhm.
Now we don't have a common language. We don't have a common person that we look at and think of to go to for the news. I teach a media literacy class at Sacred Heart University, and I ask my students every year, where are you getting your information? And a lot of it, frankly, is social media, but even less than that is that they don't get it at all. They literally get it either because they hear someone say something, a parent tells them things. They're that disconnected in many ways. Now, that's not to say all of them, because I know, the response to this is, well, there's a lot that are connected. But I think that actually it's not as much as you think. And I think it depends on situations. Certain things bring people together. So, for example, the whole issue with the Taylor Swift tickets, if we wanted to really pull in something very much connected to this generation, that has pulled people together in a whole different way because those tickets were expensive and people were really angry. And now we have congressmen involved in the whole thing. So that was one thing.
Well, I'm sorry. I am not a Swiftie. I
What?
think it's
No, just
pronounced.
kidding.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I am sorry. Look, I had an episode where this one professor's like, I'm a Swiftie, and he's like, I'm going to convert you, and he kept talking about it along with the subject. So I
Yeah.
get it. People are what happened with the just briefly? What happened with the Taylor Swift tickets? I don't.
So she had the biggest concert tour of I don't know historically if it was the
Oh my
biggest.
God!
Yes, but huge. But the tickets were a problem. People couldn't get them. They crashed. They were $1,000. It was like enormously. This whole discussion started to happen about the price of tickets and how really unfair it is in many ways and unequitable. And we could go down the whole road of this and who's making money, and which are actually all very good media literacy questions. So this is actually one of those teachable moments where it comes up that is pop culture related, but very much lends itself to why it is that we actually need more media literacy and financial literacy. And I could probably go through, what it is that we don't understand about the dynamics of how things are happening in the world. So that's why I used it as an example, because for my college students, that's a point of reference for them that they really can connect to because pop culture is big to them. It's an important part. Whereas if I were to bring up some other issues, unless they feel a personal connection to it, it just seems like it's happening so far away. So, the Ukraine-Russia war, for example, unless they feel a connection to it because there's something personally connecting them, there's a disconnect happening there. Even when we talk about democracy and polarization, there's a lot to be said about, are they invested in being a part of the civic process or not? They have mixed feelings about it. And certainly, depending on what's going on at the time frame, they'll either be 100% in or not necessarily completely in. And in fact, this term I asked, how many people are, ready to vote and can, or at least registered to vote, and not everybody's registered to vote yet. So I mean, that really starts to kind of bridge some of this discussion about, are they now polarized because of what's happening, so they're disinterested, or are they galvanized because of the polarization to change it? And I think those are some of the issues that we're sort of seeing. And that's not just in the college level, that's in, I think, everyday people. When we see the conversations happening in the media, the fact that people aren't viewing things in the same way, they're not interested in the debates, they're not really interested in some of the things that are happening. The viewership in that particular area is very low, but they're interested in issues. So I think that's added sort of to the conversation. That was probably a longer answer than you wanted. But
No, that was perfect. So I want to go back to this. It wasn't exactly the main issue, but I want to go back. So you're a college professor. You're teaching the young minds of America. And we are constantly hearing about, well, social media makes everybody polarized. The youth are the most on social media, so they must be driving the polarization. Yet what I'm hearing from you is
no,
they're not necessarily looking up the news on social media. Is that
they're
right?
not driving the polarization. I don't know. I mean, honestly, they're not driving the polarization. I'm actually surprised to hear that. I think the polarization for me, at least from the things that I've heard from them, from the things that they respond to in class, is very much what they see circling around them. It's not that, and I think the other part is one of the things they've said to me, especially this past year, which has been really interesting for me, is that they don't feel that they have a voice. They're afraid to use their voice because of social media. I've had many students who've said to me they don't want to share their opinion because they're afraid that their opinion will be captured and then they won't be able to have a job or a profession in the future because something they may have said. And so I think it's not that they're not interested. In fact, I think they have so much to say. And I love teaching them for this reason, because they're so open to having conversations. I think they desperately want them, in fact. but they're not always given the opportunity to have those conversations, to share what they're thinking, to question things. There's a lot of things that I think they question because they really don't know. So interestingly enough, in a world where we have all this information, there's a lot of lack of information that they have. This past term, every time they had a question about the world, they would say, I have an adulting question. And it would be, something that you would think was kind of okay, common sense, you think, at least certainly for my generation, but not so much for them, because there's this sort of assumption that somehow because of social media they know more, they have more. And I would argue that that's not true, that social media has bombarded them with almost too much information, that they're not able to necessarily delineate good information from bad information. And sometimes they're not able to find the information that is just not, has nothing to do with polarization, just basic stuff, because they're not able to capture that.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, because a lot of the research on political polarization and in the popular media goes something like this. Social media algorithms are designed to make us angry at each other.
Right.
People are on social media, therefore that what causes polarization. We all see kids and people under 30 on their phones more, so therefore they must be driving the polarization because they're on social media, and social media has to be doing this to us. That's the theory.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Thank you. Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
I know listen, I think that, polarization, I feel, frankly, to me, seems to be more at this level of, our maybe 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I don't know. I actually see it as an older generation issue. And I'm not saying the older generation, I'm saying in general, definitely more than that. And I often wonder if it's because they are in the middle of traditional media. They are the ones who are still looking at the CNNs, the MSNBCs, the Fox News, all of that. They're not watching it in the same way. In fact, their viewership is probably very minimal because there's other things going on.
I thank you. You have hit upon an important point. So there's a debate in the literature, and it goes like this. Maybe it's not the youth, maybe it's the elderly and the older people who are the most polarized, because they seem to have very polarized opinions on surveys, and yet they're not part of social media. So this is ongoing debate on who's really causing it. Is it the youth and social media, or is it not social media and not the youth? And there's a few professors saying, well, actually, there's some evidence that it's not the youth. It's like you said, people 40, 50, 60 who aren't on social media, who are primarily driving polarization in America. And that just goes against the main narrative. The main narrative is this thing broke us all. If we didn't have Facebook and Twitter and all these other algorithms, everything would be fine and America would be perfect and there'd be no division at all and everybody would work out with each other. It's a boogeyman. And I've been saying, boy, doesn't that smell like a boogeyman? All of our problems neatly confined to this one thing. And if we could just get rid of this one thing, Humpty Dumpty gets put back together again and he sits back on the wall and everything's perfect. And I go, that seems a little bit too simplistic and too fanciful.
Way too simplistic. So here's the thing, like I'm actually really glad that you asked me this question, because I watched some of the other interviews that you did with people, and it was starting to concern me a little bit that was sort of the rhetoric that was coming out. Because look, this is ultimately, I actually don't love this generation thing where it's them versus us. They had this, they didn't have that. In fact, I actually just had this conversation this weekend with a cousin of mine, and we were talking about literally that, we focus on this generation piece to the point where we actually miss the problem that's actually in front of us. And so here's what I would say is that I absolutely believe that the distraction that is the cell phone and the smartphone, and that has definitely contributed to loneliness, to other issues that people are facing. And yes, it has contributed to actually getting misinformation. But I think that the next step of polarization is that this idea that we don't want to have connections with people. And I find that that's actually not true, is that there is this need for a dialogue, this need for connections, this need for bridging or bonding to happen. And I see it on both sides. I feel it missing somewhere in the middle. In fact, I have more people who will say things like, why would you share that article? Why do you read that information? In the middle, the people in the middle, not from the people on the other side, where I very much believe we need to engage in all pieces of information, in all literature. And all variations of media if we want to know what's happening around the world. Now, that doesn't mean that, everyone's going to be on Facebook. In fact, my Gen Zers are not on Facebook so much.
Right.
And my elderly, they are maybe on, but not as much as people think. They're there to look at the grandchildren's pictures and get connected to family. It's still this middle group that really kind of came on when things were starting to ramp up with social media, that have sort of been in these spaces and use it for these purposes as well. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot to be said about how we use this, how we as individuals process information, who we see ourselves in these spaces, and how much it affects the way we think and believe. So, I mean, I always feel that this is sort of one of those doors that needs a little bit more sifting through of information than this sort of, well, this is them and this is us.
I really appreciate that. And that's why we started doing the series. It started with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm not endorsing her. I'm not criticizing her. I'm just mentioning her and her tweet on President's Day that we can't live together. Red and blue need to separate. And I was researching this, and I go, oh, this is a very serious topic. And I believe that it deserves some serious attention. And I saw NPR did one article on it. And they interviewed 3 professors, and they all basically said, well, social media and, cable news isn't helpful. And, if we kind of fix that and maybe figured out gerrymandering, then poof, everything's fixed. And I'm like, that's really not a deep view that's really lacking nuance. You didn't ask everybody. You're missing a lot of perspectives. It was cherry picked, and you focused on the easy culprits. And I think sometimes the media says this is the problem because that's what they can get the public to pay attention to and buy newspapers for. And so here's your boogeyman. It's social media, and they're making you angry. Okay, I buy that as a reader. I'll listen to more stories based upon that.
Right.
I want to tell you, hey, the boogeyman is grab a mirror. It's you.
Right.
And it's bad behaviors you've learned for 30 years. And we're going to work with you to undo all these bad behaviors. That's not as much fun.
Well, I also think we've sort of we've created this plot, right? That's sort of going on about this us versus them. And it's kind of continued in different places and different spaces and places that you wouldn't have expected. And, also this idea that people are made up of this one issue, this one thing. And I often say that when we look at, just in general, anything that's happened, I would say in the last 15 years of why people vote for who they vote for, sometimes it's one issue, but sometimes it's a mix of other things that people don't recognize because it's easier to run with the most negative part of any story than to run with the idea, well, there's a lot more going on. And people don't make all their decisions or their choices based on the one element. And the other thing I would say is, I'm not really sure we're watching news these days. I really, I beg to differ when it comes to that. I will say that, we probably get about 30 minutes of news on any given day, but then we have a cycle of opinion makers who continue to manifest on one piece of information, so to the point where one year I don't think we ever got past 3 stories the whole entire year, and the only thing that broke in was whenever there was some climate issue that happened and we had to focus on that, and then we returned to the normal chatter of the day, whatever it may be. So because of that, we are less of an informed society in the United States than we should be. It's also why I think we feel we don't know each other. People on the East Coast, see things very differently than people on the West Coast. And middle America, very different than everybody else. Right. I know you look at that look on your face, right? So whenever people are shocked about polls, this always like comes to my mind that the night of the 2016 election and the polls were all over the place and everyone's in shock. And I'm more shocked that people were in shock. That's the part, because I wanted to say, then you haven't been looking around and you haven't been paying attention. And in the media in particular, when you don't cover the majority of where people are in the United States, which is the middle of America, you tend to be completely misdirected into what you understand about what's happening with people. And so, unfortunately, most of our media happens to be based in New York. And New York is its filter, it's a bubble of its own. You don't have the same education system. And let me actually delineate that more. I'm talking about New York City, not New York, because I
Right.
feel like New
Yeah.
York gets sort of bombarded under the New York City, and it's not. New York City and New York are two different things.
Yeah.
And so I think those are conversations that need to happen. And I think we need to be more open to those conversations and maybe a little bit more critical about these assumptions that are made about people and where they live and why they choose what they choose. But that actually means that you need to also be open to the conversation. And so for me, media literacy is about opening the conversation. It's setting the space to have a dialogue that can hopefully create an opportunity for people to ask questions. And those wonder, like, I wonder about that person, I wonder about that community. Well, ask them. Find out why a community thinks the way they think or believes the way they think, so that at least you have some semblance of understanding. I think we've kind of gotten to this point where we've sort of made it so that, oh, this is bad, and so we're going to place the word toxic in it, and then we're going to say we're not going to engage. And yet engaging with each other and engaging in information is part of growth.
So is it I remember Lester Holt, I believe he's on NBC, one of the major network TV news,
Yep.
and he won Journalist of the Award, Journalist of the Year award. And I think this is about 2 years ago. In his award speech for being Journalist of the Award, he said, you know what, in journalism, we don't need to tell both sides. It's okay to have a one perspective, and who needs to cover the other sides because they're bad guys. He literally basically said that on TV while accepting the Journalist Award. And I go, I wonder if Edward R. Murrow and Robert Walter Cronkite would agree, or if they would be weeping in their chairs while watching that. I wonder. How do we get to, because I hear what you're saying. Why were people so shocked that Trump won in 2016? Well, you weren't talking to a lot of people in America and hearing what they wanted to hear. And maybe that's why the polls were off in 2016 and 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a disconnect. How do we, but there seems to be an opinion in the intelligentsia, academia, media, politicians of, if somebody's bad and nasty, it's better to just not talk to them, deplatform them, remove everything they have to say, make sure nobody sees it, and then tell everybody, how dare you read what that person is. Is that a good thing for us learning media literacy as a country, or is that the exact opposite of what we were going to go?
No, I mean, that's so I often say cancel culture and censorship found each other, and they sort of like blew each other up. So we have both going on right now in this country. We have cancel culture and censorship. And, depending on, each side, they would say, oh, no, one's worse than the other. But I actually think they're quite the same. We've created this idea that this isn't, if we don't like it, we're not going to let someone speak about it. So, in many colleges and universities, you can't get guest speakers to come any longer to have a dialogue about anything.
Yeah.
And I find that's actually problematic, because how do you learn? How do you actually get to know what you really like and really don't like, instead of engaging in a dialogue. Now, there are moments, I would say, certainly there are things that we don't want. I can't say that. I mean, there's probably moments, if you probably gave me I would say maybe there's some concern for certain things, but I'm often, I use this piece, Van Jones, who was on CNN.
Love
He
him.
spoke at University of Chicago one year, and he really came on strong about this idea of, you're in college, you're supposed to be extending your thinking. He goes, and he referenced his family who, had gone through all this abuse and all these things during the civil, rights movement. And he was like, put your boots on and get moving. He goes, participate, learn, and I thought, it was such a strong commentary on why we need to have more dialogue. And I think that it gets lost along the way because, people are afraid of things. And that's another part that I guess I'm always amazed by as well, is that, the way you get through fear is to confront it. So if
Hmm.
we're not confronting issues that are problematic, are we just kind of perpetuating the same kind of circular conversations? And so therefore we continue to be polarized.
So, if we're worried about polarization as a country, banning other people with different perspectives and making sure no one can see them isn't the best idea.
Right.
Saying, ooh, gross. I'm in New York or Los Angeles. I don't want to talk to a rural farmer in Kentucky, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, etc., because they said something on TV that offended me. So I don't even want to spend any time listening to them or looking at
Right.
their Twitter feed or trying to understand them. And making sure that you really don't travel to areas that don't have your version of the good life. If you don't have
Right.
safe places and I can control who the speakers are, then I really don't want to go to your area. In fact, the schools that I want to go to are the ones where I have total control
Right.
over anyone who gets to come in and any ideas that come in. And I can make sure that I'm not even exposed to any ideas that I find remotely bothersome at all. It sounds, what I'm hearing is isolate yourself, cut yourself off, isolate yourself, cut yourself off. And the problem with polarization is, from the research I've been doing, is people have no idea what the other side is like because they don't talk to them. They have no
Right.
association. And so they attribute the worst possible motives
Right.
to the other side at
Right.
levels we have not seen in a century. For
Right.
example, you have many polls now where a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republican voters believe the majority of voters on the other party are evil or the quote enemy or quote a clear and present danger.
Right.
Phrases that we would use for a Russian nuclear attack or an ISIS terrorist attack.
Right.
A majority of people in both parties are now using to describe people in the other party. And I just think maybe this isolating ourselves, don't listen to their media, don't see what they have to say, don't talk to them, cancel them, make sure they're shut off, deplatform them. Maybe that's
Right.
making it worse.
Oh, I do think that. And I also think, it's funny because we're talking about this in like this very public way of, public people. But what happens when it happens in your family? Which is literally, this is something that is happening in families. I'm going to recommend something, and I noticed that you always ask this at the end, but I'm going to recommend it now.
Oh no, no, she's messing up. Yeah, please.
um, I read this book over the summer, and I actually met the author this summer as well, Monica Guzman. I never thought of it this way, and she is a Mexican American, and I hope I'm being very clear on this part. I don't want to ever, give misinformation. And she is a Democrat, and her parents are Republican, and so she has written a book about sort of this shockwave that went through her when she realized how different things were, and she wrote this, I think, excellent book. That I'm using with a group of students this term to really talk about these issues of polarization, because she did what we talked about. Well, how is it possible that I believe this and I have parents who believe what they believe? And we live in the same house, whatever it may be, all of it's the same. But now there's communities around me that are like this. So let me find out about them. And so she did that. And I think, you know, for her, she writes a lot about this idea of curiosity. Right, that's the book. This idea of, have we lost the ability to be curious about the other? And if you're curious about the other, then you want to find out more. And I think that really speaks volumes in many ways about that part of us. Are we no longer curious people? Have we lost this ability to, meet someone and say, I want to know more about you. I want to know, how you think and the whole thing. It doesn't mean that you're going to be their best friend. It's not that. It's really about understanding, and really, seeing people for who they're at. I know Storyworks. Are you familiar with Storyworks?
No,
So,
no.
so Storyworks is, oh my gosh, they're an organization in New York, and they've been doing this thing where they pair people up. They're one's Republicans, one's Democrat, but they don't know that piece. They pair them up based on who they are. Like, are you a family? Are you a mother with two kids, and these things, so that they get to sit in front of each other and have these conversations. And I might be the setup of all of this. I might not be 100% on how they actually work this out. But what they do is they bring these two people together to have conversations. Same kind of thing. They're two very different people. And yet when they talk about the things that they worry about, their kids, raising their kids, the things that they worry about economics, whatever it may be, inflation, it's the same on both sides. But for some reason, one thing triggers the off of the other, and that's the thing, right? But it's this idea of, can we still have these conversations? Because there's more of the same of us, I think, than there is the differences, but we've allowed the differences to be highlighted the most.
That's a very popular theory with a lot of the research on political polarization, largely pioneered by Professor Morris Fiorina and others. But it goes something like this: we don't have polarization, we don't have division. We have these national surveys going back 30 years that show a majority of Americans want a woman to have the right to access to choose. They want safe schools. They want gun-free zones. They want clean drinking water. And so because we have these surveys that when we ask people what they want, and a majority, 60, 70% say this, we can't really be divided because we have these common wants.
Right.
At least that's a theory, and that seems like something you found.
But our common wants are boring to the media. Like, our common wants are not the things that are a selling point, right? I mean, that's part of what's happened. It's not the thing that's going to make you turn on the news. It's not what ad buyers are going to want to filter their money to. But like, people are worried about inflation, right? Is inflation interesting? Is it something that people, are gravitating to and saying, oh my goodness, I want to talk about inflation today? But the average person who is a working individual right now, we're worried about stuff like this because it affects us. And so I think those are the things that matter to a certain extent. Now, does it matter in the same way for youth? No, media literacy allows for these conversations to happen, right? It allows for dialogue to happen if you're open to receiving and being a part of the conversation. It means that you have to step aside a little bit. We all have belief systems, right? We all have things that we adhere to, things that really matter to us. But sometimes, in order to have the kind of deep conversations that we're talking about, to be able to get people to at least say, well, maybe question that a little bit more, you have to step in. We have to step towards each other, not step away from each other. It takes a lot of work sometimes. And I think one of the things about media literacy that's concerning to me right now is that everybody makes it sound, well, I shouldn't say everybody. Let me not say that. People make it sound, though, that it's simple. It's like a simple process. It's media literacy education. We should be able doing it. But it's actually a lot of work. And I think people, not that it's not accessible, it is, but you have to want to be able to be in those accessible moments. And so when people are saying, well, in education it should exist, yes, it should exist, but it means that we need to have training for people in this area, because not everybody is comfortable with having deep conversations. We forget that there's a lot more going on. And so this is actually one of the things that I also want to note in the way we're talking about this. In schools, the dynamic is different. Okay. And I'm talking about public education, not college. College is very different because, it operates very different. People are choosing to go to college. Public education is not the same.
Right.
Everyone is coming into it. And so, oftentimes I hear people in different organizations who I think are, I certainly believe they're well meaning, but I think that they assume an awful lot about what's happening in schools. And you can't do that because teachers right now in the United States are going through a lot. It's not a simple process. So, I hear, oh, this law has been put into place and so it's mandated and so teachers have to do it. Among the 50 other things that teachers are doing, yes. But so that means that the easiest role is to get something in place that would, say, oh, I did the checkbox on something that says I'm mandated. But deep media literacy is more than a check system. It's more
Right.
than a simple, okay, yes, no. It's really saying, I want to understand more and learn more. And I think it's very possible in public education, but it's a commitment as well. And I think, one has to go hand in hand with the other. Otherwise, we're not really doing media literacy, right? I mean, because I can teach you how to research, but that's not necessarily media literacy. I can teach you how to look for information, but that's not necessarily media literacy. And I think that's really important. And so the conversation about misinformation and disinformation, which has really taken the full scope of media literacy's attention, has been the easy route in because we all worry about mis and disinformation. We don't necessarily talk about polarization, though, in schools, right? So that's
Yeah.
the part that I think, where we mix up things thinking that, oh, well, this will take care of that problem. It will not if we're not really looking at that problem.
That makes sense. I think for me, yeah, media literacy was about cutting, from what I heard, was it was about cutting down on fake news and
Right.
not buying bad information and being able to look at what's coming to you, who's the author, what's their agenda, what's their point, why are they communicating this way, what could be their motive,
Right.
before you just, so you don't just passively absorb information, you're actually thinking about what you're allowing into your brain. Um, at the same time, fake news is a big issue, and it seems to me that during this interview series, I'll talk to a lot of liberals, I'll talk to a lot of conservatives. I find a lot of disconnect on facts.
Hmm.
That there's a lot of things that liberals know to be true that are facts that conservatives just, they don't know, they never heard of it, or they don't believe it. On the other hand, there's also the converse. There's a
Right.
lot of facts that conservatives know that none of my liberal friends will acknowledge, never
Right.
heard of it, don't know what you're talking about. And since I never saw it in my network feeds, it must not be worth knowing. So let's not even talk about it. Like the Durham report. Who cares that it was a official federal government investigation? Who cares that it paints a negative picture on Hillary Clinton? Let's not look about it at all, even though it's on the official Department of Justice website. Let's just not talk about it.
Right.
That's what I see. But then on the right, there's other things like, well, January 6th, just some people got out of hand. It's fine. And what I find is that there's a disconnect of facts from both sides. And I
Right.
thought, what if we had an America where everybody on the right had to acknowledge January 6th was bad and you shouldn't have done it and it's not okay, and Stop the Steal was bad. But then on the left, we also acknowledged that saying that Donald Trump was put into office by the Russian government has been disproven, even
Right.
though it was said for years. And
Right.
that there were a lot of liberals who promoted a lie and never backed down and never apologized. And I thought, if we had an America where you have to admit you got it wrong publicly and admit some of our facts, and you have to admit you got it wrong publicly and admit some of our facts, maybe we'd actually have a conversation because we could have a set of shared facts, which we
So there's
don't at all.
right. So there's the rub, right there is that you have to meet in the middle somewhere. And I
Just
think
a
that's,
theory.
yeah. But so ultimately, what I'll say is, I'm not sure that politics is the meeting of the middle because it's so. I mean, that's part of the problem, right? Is that everyone is using that as we have to meet in the middle with politics, but I think we meet in the middle someplace else. And I think you can do it with many other ways. And then eventually, when you've established that you're not someone to be feared, and there's no, there's no underlining motivation with media literacy. Like I always, it's been
Right.
really interesting because there's been a lot of questions about media literacy lately that have been sort of found their way where, people will ask things like, well, are you going to tell me what to think? No, that's
Mm,
not it at all.
right.
The idea is you tell me what you're thinking. Let other people tell you what they're thinking. Let's talk about that. And that's where I think this is really difficult. And it's very difficult when people are politically polarized. It's easier to talk about someone like Taylor Swift, for
Right.
example,
Right.
and say, hey, this was an issue. Don't you think price gouging is a problem? And everybody can comment at you with, yes, price gouging is this and that. And, we can get to a place where, oh, okay, we get it. Okay. And then we can move on to another level, but you can't get there just by, starting with that. That's not the way to enhance communication, really. What we're talking about is how do we build rapport between different communities so that we can actually have the kinds of conversations that we would really love to see happening nationwide in our Congress, in our communities, in our families. That's where I think this is where the goal is. Uh, and it takes time and it takes the willingness to want to participate.
Um, I'm in downtown New York City, New York City,
Yeah.
and I'm a hardcore liberal. And I say, hey, I'm going to go reach out to a conservative to heal America. So I go downstairs and I go to the Starbucks at the corner of the giant skyscraper. And I talked to a guy who, well, he technically says he's a Republican. Yeah, he's in an LGBTQ relationship and he recycles and believes in climate change, but he voted for Trump for tax reasons. And then I have a conversation with him and we agree on one or two things. And then I go, see, I reached out to the other side, all not that easy. And I go, okay, now do that with somebody from rural Kentucky
Right.
who has no commonality with your values and has never been to New York City and is not surrounded by any minorities, any youth, any LGBTQ, or anybody who thinks differently, and then tell me how easy it is to have a conversation with them. And it's not
Yeah.
really fair to say those are the same conversations, is it?
No, but I think that it's also wrong to think that there's no commonality.
Okay.
I just think, I think that's also assuming that you can't have that conversation. It's I I think that there's more to people than this one thing. And so for me, it's not about this one instance. In fact, when you were saying, I go down to Starbucks in New York City, I was like, you found a conservative? No.
Well,
That's
but
like,
that's the it because
right.
I live near Santa Monica, and they'll go, "Oh yeah, I talked to a Republican." You talk to a San Francisco or Santa Monica Republican. That
Right.
is, and I have
Right.
family in Panhandle, Texas, just
Sure.
south of Oklahoma. They're nothing alike.
No. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation.
True, of
I
course.
think that's the part that I find really interesting. It's this idea that we're so different. We can't possibly have a conversation. Of course you can. The question is, what kind of conversation are you wanting to have? If this is about, you want to just relay your beliefs and you don't want to hear anything else, so that's not a conversation.
Right.
If you want to learn about someone, there's lots of ways to ask questions to learn about someone. And I think learning about people is something that we've kind of forgotten along the way because, and maybe this is a part because of social media has made it harder instead of easier. We only see what people want you to see on
Yeah.
social media. You don't see all of us, right? Um, and so I think that also provides another problem with how we are engaging with each other. If your viewpoints are limited, then no, it's not going to work. One of the questions in media literacy is, well, there's two questions that I actually love the most, which is, one is, who is omitted from the message? Okay. So who's not there? Who's not being seen? And if you look at the news every night, and I mean this, as a person who would watch the news, who's missing every night? I think you could probably pinpoint pretty much more than a dozen different types of people who are missing every single night. Okay. And so if that is true, then you're still being limited by your viewpoint, because this is the message that is being driven to you over and over again, as if it's representative of the full of us. One of the reasons why I love doing international work, to be honest with you, is because it breaks this. It breaks this idea of the other, because you live next to the other. You aren't, whether I'm in, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, or LA, or Texas, for some reason, in the United States, we have this, like, this is who we all, this is us, right? But when you are overseas and you are in Europe and you are in Spain, Portugal, France, we're talking about very, very different communities and different people. And so the ability to see the difference is in front of you all the time. It's logical because it's happening. It's every day. We are a huge country. The misperceptions about us in the United States and the way that gets transferred overseas has always been concerning to me, right? So you go into another country and what do people know about us, right? Half the time, when they're watching the Kardashians, they all think we live like the Kardashians, and most of America doesn't live that life, right? But that's not what the message is about us. And I think, those are things that I think are missing in this conversation. What's different about us is what should be what is unique and what is wanting to be learned about us. But for some reason, that isn't it. And there's no way that someone who lives in Oklahoma is the same as the person who lives in Colorado. But for some reason, because they live in the United States, we don't want to see that because it's still in the same country.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, totally agree. They accept regional variation, cultural variation. A lot of other foreign countries even have autonomous provinces where they go, you're kind of culturally different, so why don't you just run this whole area on your own? You're still within our government. You can't form your own military, but we'll give you and that's seen as just wild here.
Yeah.
And yet there's almost every country that's the size of America does that because they found it was really difficult to run something that big. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and yet we don't. We're like, no, everybody, well, we got this, man. And yet here we are talking about a national divorce and that we can't live with each other. Maybe it's because we don't allow the expression of regional variation and acceptance of all of our various identities. What was the other top question? You said you had two. The two top favorite questions. One is who's omitted from the message, and what is the second one, Professor? As we wind,
how might different people interpret this message differently from me? Because I think that's another part, is that when you're sitting in a classroom, and this is K through 12 or college, there's a lot of different people sitting in the room, and they don't have the same backgrounds. So they're not always going to receive things the way you think they're going to receive things, because either socioeconomically they're different from you, racially they're different from you, different from the person sitting next to them. Sometimes the messages that are put out there, you don't understand why it is that someone might take offense to it and another person may not. And I think beyond the offense, though, is at least the understanding of what the offense is. If you can't get to the, why this person might be offended, understand why that is, right? Or why that message isn't being received in the same way. It's a step of asking, okay, what could this be? Okay, you go to see a movie. You might love horror movies. The person next to you doesn't love horror movies. Right, exactly. You're coming through, one person loves the film, the other person hates the film. Why? Right? Because you're different from each other, right? You might be built differently. You might have liked
Right.
something the other, whatever. It doesn't matter. You love, I don't even know. I could give you like a
So
like
don't just
Star Wars.
hate on them.
Yeah,
You don't
exactly.
like the movies I like, so you're a bad person.
Right. That's, but we don't do that. Does that mean we never engage with that person again because they didn't like the movie? Of course not. That's just a piece of it. But this is literally taking it and throwing it out there, you know? And yes, someone will say, well, that's very simplistic. Okay, I agree. That's very simplistic to a certain extent. However, we're talking about humanity. And in the end, are we trying to build bridges or break bridges?
Ooh.
I know. Let's
Well,
leave you with that.
yeah, in California, part of California culture is that we consider ourselves bridge builders. So we had a governor, Jerry Brown, and he was traveling around the world, and he goes, "Americans build walls while Californians build bridges." That was when Trump was president. So it's a popular phrase here. We build bridges, meaning we're willing to embrace diversity, reach out, talk to other
Right.
people. Uh, Unless they are alt-right conservative, in which case the California culture goes away and we don't want to hear anything you have to do with that. So we're not perfect out here either. Um,
Right.
yeah, yeah, there's a lot of self-censorship. And uh, just two more questions, if I may.
Sure.
First thing I do want to point out, so very proud of you. Good work, Monica Guzman. There's not, as I can tell, a whole lot of Latin people in the political science sphere. So love seeing that. Love seeing Latinos get up there. I too am Mexican. And I too am liberal and grew up around conservatives. And so I know exactly what she's talking about. It's helped me start the series. I was able to reach out to a lot of conservatives, a lot of liberals, and talk to them both equally. I think
Sure.
because I grew up in that household. So I wasn't able to just say all conservatives are bad, evil, wicked, nasty people. Damn them all. I had to go, well, I'm related to a couple of them and I know they're not all bad. So maybe there's something they're seeing. Of course, I didn't change my mind to match them, but some sort of basic respect, you can realize they're humans. So I wanted to say credits to her. I wanted to ask you about this thing you had said. This bothered me a lot
Mm.
because I've heard this a lot. There's a
Yep.
lot of studies now from people studying the political separation space who are saying that increasingly on surveys, increasingly year after year, an increasing number of people say, I'm scared to have a conversation about politics or express my opinion with anybody. And the
Right.
number keeps going up and up and up. And then I see college students, they're afraid to express their opinion because something might be on social media. It's very popular to destroy others in
Yeah.
their age cohort based upon, I saw you say something on social media, let's ruin your reputation for life.
Right.
How are we going to reduce political polarization when an increasing number of adults, an increasing number of college students every year are told, don't talk to anybody and never express your opinion?
Well, I teach a media literacy class. So we start with, we are going to respect each other's opinion. That's the class. This, and I need to hear your voice. That's the class. And I will be honest with you, depending on the year, sometimes it takes 3 weeks, sometimes it takes 6 weeks. I don't, sometimes last semester, I had one of the best classes I ever had. It started in week 1. It was, I don't know if it was this relief that came with, we are going to have this, we're going to have discussions. Um, we're going to have some tough discussions. We're not always going to agree, and that's okay. I think that's the part that we haven't communicated well enough. It actually is okay to disagree. It's this idea that somehow we all have to be on the same plane together all the time that's actually incorrect. We're not going to be. Well, that doesn't even happen in a relationship, for goodness sakes. So how is that going to happen in a college classroom or a school classroom? We It's human nature to be different and to want to be different. So why are we denying that of ourselves and of our students? And why are we not building that piece or growing it? I personally think media literacy education allows for that to happen. I really do. And to me, that's why I think it's important, because it gives this community aspect to the work that is often missed when we say, oh, it's about disinformation or it's about misinformation. Yes, it's about all those things. It's about the ability to access, analyze, value, all of that. It's about discernment. I could give you all the words, but really it's about building a community again that can have varying opinions, that can have dialogue, that can have the bridge building that we're talking about, so that we don't have people who are afraid to express thoughts. We need those expressions.
Totally agree. I find it to be a worrying place. Colleges have said for the last, I don't know, 15 years. Actually, corporations are saying for the last 15 years that all the college graduates coming out are lacking a thing called critical thinking skills.
Right.
Goes back over 15 years. And then we can see students lacking the ability to understand politics, and then adults, same thing, carrying on. And then we have less conversations and we censor it. And it looks like we'll just get to a place where we never talk to each other. We just have our own personal echo chambers and we kind of scream at each other across the thing from there.
Right.
And
Right.
until we do meet each other, and then it's calamitous and very aggressive. I agree with you. This seems like one of the most positive trends that I've seen dealing with the situation where the country is. That's why I've been fascinated to talk to more people who work in the space, because I find it to be low-hanging fruit. Everybody can learn media literacy. You don't have to hurt anybody. It doesn't cost any money. And it's something we can all do on our own. And when I talk about how I think the media and academia doesn't want to hear about how the problem with polarization might be a problem within the hearts of 300 million people and not just algorithm.
Right.
This is the way to fix it.
Right.
This is how you do generational change.
Right. Right. And listen, I think that we need to be talking more to each other. I mean, I think one of the things that I find troubling, and I'm one of these people's very, certainly this is my work, so I'm cognizant, I'm aware of what's happening around me when I see people sitting at a dinner or a lunch, and the first thing I see is a child being put in front of a TV screen and the earbuds go in, and two adults talking, but not necessarily with the child. So we're eliminating that piece, which was something that is learned. How we talk to each other started at the dinner table, or started at a lunch table, or started with between people, whatever. The table maybe not there, but whatever. We had that, right? In many cases, this is a cultural piece. This is you tend to go to different cultures, and there is this breaking of bread that happens that is about the exchange of ideas, the exchange of people, and when you don't have that any longer, you have silence. And so that silence just continues until there's a point where there's no interaction any longer. I often have heard, and I certainly even this week, I had a professor who said to me, 80 students in silence, like silence. The same four people might be talking, but the rest are silent. And progressively, I hear that often. To engage, to have dialogue is incredibly important. But if you've not fostered it, if you've not been taught to have those kinds of moments, you do lose it. You do lose them.
I wonder, because there's a lot of pressure to not say anything. People have been fired for their social media posts. People have had their reputations and lives destroyed for social media posts.
Right.
I don't see that going away, and that seems to be embraced. My mom works at a Fortune 500 company, and that's all through Fortune 500 companies. Let's look at all your social media posts and see if there's anything negative, and we will base our decision on if we're going to hire you based upon that. And then you have the kids coming out now saying, well, it might affect what schools I can get into, who I can know. So I don't see any pressures from society pulling off that. It seems to be more and more like, you better watch anything online ever for the rest of your life that could possibly be interpreted poorly.
Right.
That just tells people, don't say anything, don't communicate. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Right. But let's do a little pushback on that too, though. There's a platform, and there's a way. Let me rephrase that. There's a way to do that. Doesn't have to be on social media. I don't think the problem is, listen, this is a whole other dialogue. We could go for another hour.
Sorry.
Understanding social media and understanding the ramifications of things are not necessarily taught well. So we do need to be aware to a certain degree, and keep in mind, a lot of times, social media has this edge because people are connecting with people they don't know. And so there's a lot of unknowns in these kind of platforms. Now, if you're even connecting with people that you do know, who do you actually know, and what are you sharing, and why are you sharing it, and what's the purpose for sharing it? So there's a lot that I think to say about that I think is also part of the problem. But for me, that's a separate issue,
Okay.
because it's not the same as engaging on a at a deeper level about something that is impactful, because there are Gen Zers and there are people of all ages who are using social media for public good. So that's not necessarily the whole scope of the problem either. And the issue is that if you never have been taught about, they call it digital citizenship, some people don't like the way it's delineated in that way, whatever it may be, how to actually engage on social platforms, that's a problem. But let's start with, how do we engage with each other first? Because if we're transferring the lack of understanding of engagement that's face to face, and then that's being perpetuated on an online space, we're going to have problems. You have to learn to be able to interact and talk about things, and know, the simple things of, why being mean to someone face to face is a problem, and how if you do it, online, it's also a problem. There's a transference of skills, and that has to start very young, because they are going to be, this generation and forever generation more after us will be a part of the digital stream. So they absolutely need to understand the digital footprint. That's a whole different conversation than that. And I think, that kind of gets mixed in a little bit with some of these other things. But if we're talking about people who are in public spaces who are using social media and then using it badly and so forth, yes, I think there's a separation between the friends you engage with and then the public that you don't see that you engage with. And you need to know that there's two different types of groups.
Yes. Or I think we need to relearn that.
Yeah. Right.
Relearn that. Okay, we're winding down. I will ask you the question I asked everybody. I think you already answered it, but it's part of the process. So you're not you, you're not me, you're a
Right.
third party person.
Sure.
You're watching the interview. Wow, learned a lot. A couple assumptions were cleared up for me personally. That was awesome. They're watching. Oh no. Uh-oh.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Here we go.
Okay, there you go.
Here
Okay.
I'm not. You're not you. I'm not me. Go ahead. I heard that part. And
then you're a third person watching this interview. They learned a lot. They're struggling to remember it all, but it's 5 days later, and there's one thing you said they can't stop thinking about. What is the one thought you want this random person to not be able to stop thinking about 5 days after watching this interview?
Oh my gosh. Of something I've said, right?
Yeah, something you said or something you could say now. You could, I want to repeat this point, or maybe I didn't get to say this, or.
I think what I would say, which is what I often say to people, is that be better listeners. Really listen. Be courageous in your listening. Really think about what you're hearing versus what you're seeing. And I apply that not just to interpersonal skills, like between you and I or your friends, but also about the world around you. Because we're being told many different things, and sometimes the things that are being told to us are not accurate to what is actually occurring around us. So be better listeners. Be a part of your community. And that means that sometimes you need to be silent and actually be the viewer and the watcher and the listener, and then actually see what's happening in front of you. Then compare that with what it is that you are being told or what you're hearing. I think that you will realize that listening to people tells you much more if you can actually find that space in you to do that. So it's not an easy task anymore. It used to be. I think it used to be easier to listen to people, but I think now with all the noise of media. We've lost that ability to do it well. But I think it's a skill that we really need to come back to.
That was beautiful. Last question. You don't have to answer, but we always ask, do you have any recommendations? Is there anyone you could think of who might be willing to be part of an honest conversation? You don't have to, but we always try to see if we can keep the conversation going.
No, you know what? Honestly, I would ask Monica Guzman. I really would.
Done.
She's lovely. I honestly think she's worth having conversation. Also, you know, I find. Do you know who Jonathan Haidt is? Haidt. Have you heard this name?
We've reached out to him. He is under contract with his publisher that he can't do interviews until he finishes his next draft manuscript.
Okay, I think.
But we're working on it.
Okay, well, he'd be interesting because I also think that some of the things that he has said has been controversial within the media literacy field, which I think is kind of interesting because I don't find him to be controversial as much as that he is poking holes in theories and in ways in which people perceive information. So I'll throw that out there.
Whoa, hold on. What did he, just real quick, what is top 2 things he said?
Well, I think his article that he had in The Atlantic about social media really upset people. So you'd have to find the article.
Okay.
I'm gonna actually I can send it to you at a different time if you want. But speaking of which, I think one of the best articles that he wrote, which you would find interesting, is the one after Babel. I don't know if you got a chance to read this, which I think is what the book is going to be based on. And it is excellent. Really and truly one of the best articles I've read. And I actually gave it to my grad students to read this term because I thought it was that good.
After Babel, like the...
Yes. You know what? I can always send you these things too. So
by George Steiner?
No, Jonathan Haidt.
Oh, got it. Okay.
He wrote, so that's why I'm saying, like, so some of his things have been really interesting to watch because he's, I think, either well received or for some people they find some of the things that he says is controversial. But I think of what he says as more as, once again, opening up the dialogue of the potential issues that we see happening in the world. My goodness. There are other people. Let me think about this some more. But those are probably the 2 people because they've been on my brain. Amanda Ripley, High Conflict. I don't know if she's a New York Times reporter. She might be someone I think that you might want to consider. She wrote the book High Conflict. And I think that she, one of the things that I loved about, which is actually one of the reasons why I was fascinated with her, is that, she actually talked about the fact that, even for her as a journalist, she's had to turn off the news and step away because it's not necessarily following what she thought it would be. And I think that really said something about anybody who can actually look at the work that they're doing in the work that is being considered most controversial and be reflective, I think is always a good thing.
I found the Jonathan Haidt article in the Atlantic.
Yes.
Why the past 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
We'll give it a look.
That's the one. And then I don't, within the media literacy world, I think there's some names overseas that I think you would be really interested in speaking.
Absolutely.
And I think just to give you a different perspective, because I know we talk about polarization primarily within the U.S. Also, right. I wanted to just make note of one thing, and then I'm sorry, I do really have to run. But
totally.
There's an organization called Braver Angels. Have you heard? Okay.
Yep.
So, and actually, Monica Guzman is one of their fellows. So if this helps you with making connections.
We have reached out to them 15 times and gotten nowhere, but we'll try again.
Really?
Yep. And reached out to all their board and all their phone numbers and all their emails, got nowhere. But so we'll keep trying.
I went to their convention this summer. And so I think that their work on polarization is actually really, really interesting. And has potential because of the fact that they are trying to depolarize from within, and I think it's quite valuable. If I could probably get you the Connecticut contact. You know, every state has a connection, but you know, Monica in general, she's on the West Coast. She might be a connection for you anyway.
Whatever you could do, we would love to talk to them. Heard about their work. At least 5 different professors have mentioned them. Braver. There was a couple other organizations doing it, but everybody seems to be familiar with this one, Braver Angels, and the work that they're doing on trying to bridge the divide and bring people together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think that, you know, they've been on like Michael Smerconish and other people. So I think it's an interesting organization that's really trying to do some good things.
Yeah, that's the impression I get from everybody. They're not just theorizing; they're actually trying to get out in the field and practice it.
Right. Hey, I'll give you one last name. Sorry, just because I thought about this. You're gonna laugh because this is one of those funny moments in my life. So when I went to this convention, I happened to be sitting next to a gentleman whose name was David McRaney. And the most interesting thing is he wrote a book that I had at home, and I didn't make the connection that I was sitting next to the author of the book, because if I had, I probably would have asked a million questions. We talked, and he happened to be at the Braver Angels convention, invited, in fact, I think, by Monica Guzman, so that he could have sort of these dialogues about, you know, why we believe what we believe. But I think he would be really interesting. I thought he was, as just on an individual basis, even some of the things that we talked about, a really excellent person to have a conversation with.
What was his book?
Uh-oh.
What does he write about, or what university is he attached to?
So he writes about the same thing about the brain and why the brain and who we are sort of why we sort of fall into these ways of not wanting to believe the other person. In the book, this is one of the things, he actually followed one of the conspiracy theorists about 9/11, and someone who actually changed his mind completely. So, but he talks about how we sort of manifest some of this within the way in which we think about things. And I'm going to have to, this is terrible because I don't have the actual name of the title at the top of my.
We'll leave it there. I'll talk to you on email. I'll email you a copy of the show. And if you have any information, I would love it.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
We'll leave it there. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for coming out. I want to say thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I will share a copy of the video with you very soon.
All right. Thanks again. Take care.
Take care.